Any questions on anything before we get started? Okay, today we're going to talk about a new chapter, and it kind of plays off of some of the things we've discussed already. We're going to talk about your stuff, all that stuff that you buy. And the way I want you to think about it initially is think about the things that you have around you that you've purchased. Whether it be that Mountain Dew bottle over there, or your skateboard, or your computer, the clothes you're wearing, the car you drove here in. You paid something for that, right? Well, I'm going to try to give you a little bigger perspective on that today. What you paid isn't the real price of the thing that you purchased. There's other costs that you aren't paying that someone else is, so that you can have the things that you have. And I have a video that I want you to watch, and I have a few questions that I want you to consider, and then I'll give you a couple minutes after the video to think a little more about them and write them down. So this video is called The Story of Stuff. I can't get it to work. Let's see, let's try this. So again, watch the video. Note any questions or comments that you have. You might like this video a lot. You might not like it at all. I'm not going to really say anything beyond that to start with. I want you to have your own opinions on it. Your opinions may or may not reflect my opinion of it, and that's fine. We'll talk about it after. We'll talk about what you thought of this. Good parts, bad parts, if any. So write down your questions that you might have, comments that you might have, and don't be afraid to discuss them after. I want you to think about this question. Do you find the video compelling? Is it a message that you are going to go and think about, or not? And why? And again, what is the most interesting thing you learned from this? Okay, so jot those three things down as you watch the video. Write down some notes and comments. We'll talk about this after, and then we'll go on and really talk more about the science behind where all those things that you purchase, your stuff, comes from. The very first day I said to you that there's a saying in mining circles, if it can't be grown, it must be mined. So I want you to think about that as well when you look at the things that are around you. You're sitting, a lot of you have computers out. Where'd all that computer material come from? A lot of people don't like mining. A lot of people don't like some of the adverse effects of mining. And I don't either. But I can tell you, without mining, your life would be very, very different. You can pretty much say goodbye to anything that's sitting in front of you. Again, if you can't grow it, you have to mine it. So if you're not wearing all cotton clothing, if you have any sort of polyester, that actually comes from the oil industry. As much as we don't like some of the effects that petroleum products have on the environment, it's absolutely necessary for you in order to have the stuff that you have purchased and that you want. I'm not defending mining, I'm not defending the oil companies, it's just a fact. That's where a lot of this stuff comes from. And that's what I want to do, is I want to give you an appreciation for that. So let's see if I can make this video work. It's always interesting. Let's see, where is my mouse? My mouse has disappeared. It's completely gone. Why is it gone? Where is it? It's all right, maybe if I go, there it is. Now it's on my screen. Thanks. It wasn't on mine. Let's see. Now where is it?
See one version on YouTube. It's about 21 minutes, 25 seconds.
It is. Okay, you gotta give me a second here.
Sure.
I don't know why my thing stopped displaying. it's right here on mine. Let's see, I have to change my screen. Always something. Apologize for the music.
Do you know these? I got a little obsessed with gardening. In fact, I got a little obsessed with all my stuff. Have you ever wondered where all the stuff we buy comes from and where it goes when we throw it out? I couldn't stop wondering about that. So I looked it up. And what the textbook said is that stuff moves through a system from extraction to production to distribution to consumption to disposal. All together, it's called the materials economy. Well, I looked into it a little bit more. In fact, I spent 10 years traveling the world, tracking where our stuff comes from and where it goes. And you know what I found out? That is not the whole story. There is a lot missing from this explanation. For one thing, this system looks like it's fine. No problem. But the truth is, it's a system in crisis. And the reason it's a system in crisis is it's a linear system and we live on a finite planet. And you cannot run a linear system on a finite planet indefinitely. Every step along the way, this system is interacting with the real world. In real life, it's not happening on a blank white page. It's interacting with societies, cultures, economies, the environment. And all along the way, it's bumping up against limits. Limits we don't see here because the diagram is incomplete. So let's go back through. Let's fill in some of the blanks and see what's missing. Well, one of the most important things that's missing is people. Yes, people. People live and work all along this system. And some people in this system matter a little more than others. Some have a little more say. Who are they? Well, let's start with the government. Now, my friends tell me I should use a tank to symbolize the government, and that's true in many countries and increasingly in our own. After all, more than 50% of our federal tax money is now going to the military. But I'm using a person to symbolize the government because I hold true to the vision and values the government should be of the people, by the people, for the people. It's the government's job to watch out for us, to take care of us. That's their job. Then along came the corporation. Now, the reason the corporation looks bigger than the government is that the corporation is bigger than the government. Of the 100 largest economies on Earth now, 51 are corporations. And as the corporation has grown in size and power, we've seen a little change in the government where they're a little more concerned in making sure everything's working out for those guys than for us. Okay, so let's see what else is missing from this picture. We'll start with extraction, which is a fancy word for natural resource exploitation, which is a fancy word for trashing the planet. What this looks like is we chop down the trees, we blow up mountains to get the metals inside, we use up all the water, and we wipe out the animals. So here we are running up against our first limit. We are running out of resources. We are using too much stuff. Now, I know this can be hard to hear, but it's the truth, so we've got to deal with it. In the past 3 decades alone, 1/3 of the planet's natural resource base has been consumed. Gone. We are cutting and mining and hauling and trashing the place so fast that we're undermining the planet's very ability for people to live here. Where I live, in the United States, we have less than 4% of our original forests left. 40% of the waterways have become undrinkable. And our problem is not just that we're using too much stuff, but we're using more than our share. We have 5% of the world's population, but we're using 30% of the world's resources and creating 30% of the world's waste. If everybody consumed at US rates, we would need 3 to 5 planets. And you know what? We've only got 1. So my country's response to this limitation is simply to go take somebody else's. This is the third world, which some would say is another word for our stuff that somehow got on somebody else's land. So what does that look like? The same thing, trashing the place. 75% of global fisheries now are fished at or beyond capacity. 80% of the planet's original forests are gone. In the Amazon alone, we're losing 2,000 trees a minute. That is 7 football fields a minute. And what about the people who live here? Well, according to these guys, they don't own these resources, even if they've been living there for generations. They don't own the means of production, and they're not buying a lot of stuff. And in this system, if you don't own or buy a lot of stuff, you don't have value. So next, the materials move to production. And what happens there is we use energy to mix toxic chemicals in with the natural resources to make toxic contaminated products. There are over 100,000 synthetic chemicals in use in commerce today. Only a handful of them have even been tested for health impacts, and none have been tested for synergistic health impacts. That means when they interact with all the other chemicals we're exposed to every day. So we don't know the full impact on health and the environment of all these toxic chemicals, but we do know one thing: toxics in, toxics out. As long as we keep putting toxics into our industrial production systems, we're going to keep getting toxics in the stuff that we bring into our homes and workplaces and schools, and our bodies. Like BFRs, brominated flame retardants, they're a chemical that make things more fireproof, but they are super toxic. They're a neurotoxin. That means toxic to the brain. What are we even doing using a chemical like this? Yet we put it in our computers, our appliances, couches, mattresses, even some pillows. In fact, we take our pillows, we douse them in a neurotoxin, then we bring them home and put our heads on them for 8 hours a night to sleep. Now, I don't know, but it seems to me in this country with so much potential, we could think of a better way to stop our heads from catching on fire at night. Now, these toxics build up the food chain and concentrate in our bodies. Do you know what is the food at the top of the food chain with the highest level of many toxic contaminants? Human breast milk. That means that we've reached a point where the smallest members of our societies, our babies, are getting the highest lifetime dose of toxic chemicals from breastfeeding from their mothers. Is that not an incredible violation? Breastfeeding must be the most fundamental human act of nurturing. It should be sacred and safe. Now, breastfeeding is still best, and mothers should definitely keep breastfeeding, but we should protect it. They should protect it. I thought they were looking out for us. And of course, the people who bear the biggest brunt of these toxic chemicals are the factory workers, many of whom are women of reproductive age. They're working with reproductive toxins, carcinogens, and more. Now I ask you, what kind of woman of reproductive age would work in a job exposed to reproductive toxins except for a woman with no other option? And that's one of the beauties of this system. The erosion of local environments and economies here ensures a constant supply of people with no other option. Globally, 200,000 people a day are moving from environments that have sustained them for generations into cities, many to live in slums, looking for work, no matter how toxic that work may be. So you see, it's not just resources that are wasted along this system, but people too. Whole communities get wasted. Yep, toxics in, toxics out. A lot of the toxics leave the factories in products, but even more leave as byproducts or pollution. And it's a lot of pollution. In the US, our industry admits to releasing over 4 billion pounds of toxic chemicals a year. And it's probably a lot more because that's only what they admit. So that's another limit, because yuck, who wants to look at and smell 4 billion pounds of toxic chemicals a year? So what do? Move the dirty factories overseas, pollute someone else's land. But surprise, a lot of that pollution is coming right back at us, carried by wind currents. So what happens after all these natural resources are turned into products? Well, it moves here for distribution. Now, distribution means selling all the toxic contaminated junk as quickly as possible. The goal here is to keep the prices down, keep the people buying, and keep the inventory moving. How do they keep the prices down? Well, they don't pay the store workers very much, and they skimp on health insurance every time they can. It's all about externalizing the costs. What that means is that the real costs of making stuff aren't captured in the price. In other words, we aren't paying for the stuff we buy. I was thinking about this the other day. I was walking to work and I wanted to listen to the news, so I popped into a Radio Shack to buy a radio. I found this cute little green radio for $4.99. I was standing there in line to buy this thing, and I was thinking, how could $4.99 possibly capture the cost of making this radio and getting it into my hands? The metal was probably mined in South Africa. The petroleum was probably drilled in Iraq. The plastics were probably produced in China. And maybe the whole thing was assembled by some 15-year-old in a maquiladora in Mexico. $4.99 wouldn't even pay the rent for the shelf space it occupied until I came along, let alone part of the staff guy's salary who helped me pick it out, or the multiple ocean cruises and truck rides pieces of this radio went on. That's how I realized I didn't pay for the radio. So who did pay? Well, these people paid with the loss of their natural resource space. These people paid with the loss of their clean air, with increasing asthma and cancer rates. Kids in the Congo paid with their future. 30% of the kids in part of the Congo have dropped out of school to mine coltan, a metal we need for our cheap and disposable electronics. These people even paid by having to cover their own health insurance. All along this system, people pitched in so I could get this radio for $4.99. And none of these contributions are recorded in any accounts book. That's what I mean by the company owners externalize the true cost of production. And that brings us to the golden arrow of consumption. This is the heart of the system, the engine that drives it. It is so important that protecting this arrow has become the top priority for both of these guys. That's why after 9/11, when our country was in shock, and President Bush could have suggested any number of appropriate things, to grieve, to pray, to hope. No, he said to shop, to shop. We have become a nation of consumers. Our primary identity has become that of being consumers, not mothers, teachers, farmers, but consumers. The primary way that our value is measured and demonstrated is by how much we contribute to this arrow, how much we consume. And do we? We shop and shop and shop, keep the materials flowing, and flow they do. Guess what percentage of total materials flow through this system is still in product or use 6 months after their date of sale in North America? 50%? 20? No, 1%. 1. In other words, 99% of the stuff we harvest, mine, process, transport, 99% of the stuff we run through this system is trashed within 6 months. Now, how can we run a planet with that level of materials throughput? It wasn't always like this. The average US person now consumes twice as much as they did 50 years ago. Ask your grandma. In her day, stewardship and resourcefulness and thrift were valued. So how did this happen? Well, it didn't just happen. It was designed. Shortly after World War II, these guys were figuring out how to ramp up the economy. Retailing analyst Victor Lebow articulated the solution that's become the norm for the whole system. He said, our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, replaced, and discarded at an ever-accelerating rate. President Eisenhower's Council of Economic Advisors chairman said that the American economy's ultimate purpose is to produce more consumer goods. More consumer goods? Our ultimate purpose? Not provide health care or education or safe transportation or sustainability or justice? Consumer goods? How did they get us to jump on board this program so enthusiastically? Well, two of their most effective strategies are planned obsolescence and perceived obsolescence. Planned obsolescence is another word for designed for the dump. It means they actually make stuff to be useless as quickly as possible, so we'll chuck it and buy a new one. It's obvious with things like plastic bags and coffee cups, but now it's even big stuff. Mops, DVDs, cameras, barbecues even, everything. Even computers. Have you noticed that when you buy a computer now, the technology is changing so fast that in just a couple of years, it's actually an impediment to communication? I was curious about this, so I opened up a big desktop computer to see what was inside. And I found out that the piece that changes each year is just a tiny little piece in the corner. But you can't just change that one piece because each new version is a different shape. So you gotta chuck the whole thing and buy a new one. So I was reading industrial design journals from the 1950s when planned obsolescence was really catching on. These designers are so open about it. They actually discuss how fast can they make stuff break that still leaves the consumer having enough faith in the product to go out and buy another one. It was so intentional. But stuff cannot break fast enough to keep this arrow afloat. So there's also perceived obsolescence. Now, perceived obsolescence convinces us to throw away stuff that is still perfectly useful. How do they do that? Well, they change the way the stuff looks. So if you bought your stuff a couple of years ago, everyone can tell that you haven't contributed to this arrow recently. And since the way we demonstrate our value is contributing to this arrow, it can be embarrassing. Like, I've had the same fat white computer monitor on my desk for 5 years. My coworker just got a new computer. She has a flat, shiny, sleek monitor. It matches her computer, it matches her phone, even her pen stand. She looks like she's driving in Spaceship Central, and I look like I've got a washing machine on my desk. Fashion is another prime example of this. Have you ever wondered why women's shoe heels go from fat one year to skinny the next to fat to skinny? It's not because there's some debate about which heel structure is the most healthy for women's feet. It's because wearing fat heels in a skinny heel year shows everybody that you haven't contributed to that era as recently, so you're not as valuable as that person in skinny heels next to you, or more likely in some ad. It's to keep us buying new shoes. Advertisements and media in general plays a big role in this. Each of us in the US is targeted with over 3,000 advertisements a day. We see more advertisements in 1 year than people 50 years ago saw in a lifetime. And if you think about it, what's the point of an ad except to make us unhappy with what we have? So 3,000 times a day, we're told our hair is wrong, our skin is wrong, our clothes are wrong, our furniture is wrong, our car is wrong. We are wrong, but it can all be made right if we just go shopping. Media also helps by hiding all of this and all of this. So the only part of the materials economy we see is the shopping. The extraction, production, and disposal all happens outside of our field of vision. So in the US, we have more stuff than ever before, but polls show that our national happiness is actually declining. Our national happiness peaked in the 1950s, the same time that this consumption mania exploded. Interesting coincidence. I think I know why. We have more stuff, but we have less time for the things that really make us happy. Friends, family, leisure time. We're working harder than ever. Some analysts say we have less leisure time than any time since feudal society. And do you know what the two main activities are that we do with the scant leisure time we have? Watch TV and shop. In the US, we spend 3 to 4 times as many hours shopping as our counterparts in Europe do. So we're in this ridiculous situation where we go to work, maybe 2 jobs even, and we come home and we're exhausted, so we plop down on our new couch and watch TV, and the commercials tell us you suck, so you gotta go to the mall to buy something to feel better, and then you gotta go to work more to pay for the stuff you just bought, so you come home and you're more tired, so you sit down and you watch more TV, and it tells you to go to the mall again, and we're on this crazy work, watch, spend treadmill, and we could just stop. So in the end, what happens to all the stuff we buy anyway? At this rate of consumption, it can't fit into our houses, even though the average house size has doubled in this country since the 1970s. It all goes out in the garbage. And that brings us to disposal. This is the part of the materials economy we all know the most because we have to haul the junk out to the curb ourselves. Each of us in the United States makes 4.5 pounds of garbage a day. That's twice what we each made 30 years ago. All of this garbage either gets dumped in a landfill, which is just a big hole in the ground, or if you're really unlucky, first it's burned in an incinerator and then dumped in the landfill. Either way, they both pollute the air, land, water, and don't forget, change the climate. Incineration is really bad. Remember those toxics back in the production stage? Well, burning the garbage releases the toxics up into the air. Even worse, it makes new super toxics, like dioxin. Dioxin is the most toxic man-made substance known to science, and incinerators are the #1 source of dioxin. That means that we could stop the #1 source of the most toxic man-made substance known just by stopping burning the trash. We could stop it today. Now, some companies don't want to deal with building landfills and incinerators here, so they just export the disposal too. What about recycling? Does recycling help? Yes, recycling helps. Recycling reduces the garbage at this end, and it reduces the pressure to mine and harvest new stuff at this end. Yes, 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 we should all recycle, but recycling is not enough. Recycling will never be enough, for a couple reasons. First, the waste coming out of our houses is just the tip of the iceberg. For every 1 garbage can of waste you put out on the curb, 70 garbage cans of waste were made upstream just to make the junk in that 1 garbage can you put out on the curb. So even if we could recycle 100% of the waste coming out of our households, it doesn't get to the core of the problems. Also, much of the garbage can't be recycled, either because it contains too many toxics or it's designed not to be recyclable in the first place. Like those juice packs, where they have layers of metal and paper and plastic all smushed together, you can never separate those for true recycling. So you see, it is a system in crisis. All along the way, we are bumping up against limits. From changing climate to declining happiness, it's just not working. But the good thing about such an all-pervasive problem is that there are so many points of intervention. There are people working here on saving forests and here on clean production, people working on labor rights and fair trade and conscious consuming and blocking landfills and incinerators, and very importantly, on taking back our government so that it really is by the people and for the people. All of this work is critically important, but things are really going to start moving when we see the connections, when we see the big picture. When people along the system get united, we can reclaim and transform this linear system into something new, a system that doesn't waste resources or people. Because what we really need to chuck is that old school throwaway mindset. There's a new school of thinking on this stuff, and it's based on sustainability and equity, green chemistry, zero waste, closed loop production, renewable energy, local living economies. It's already happening. Now, some say it's unrealistic, idealistic, that it can't happen, but I say the ones who are unrealistic are those that want to continue with the old path. That's dreaming. Remember, that old way didn't just happen. It's not like gravity that we've just got to live with. People created it, and we're people too. So let's create something new.
Okay, get rid of that music. There we go. All right, so just take a minute or two, look through here, answer a few of the questions, and we'll talk about it in a second. Okay, let's start with B. What'd you think of the video? What'd you think of the message and the messenger? Who wants to start? Who wants to be bold? Yes.
I thought that the video has a lot of things in it that are already discussed, and so I thought that was cool that people are already conscious about it. I don't know when that video was made or whatever, but yeah, so I was just thinking, oh, what people are saying this.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
I thought it was compelling to make a stance and a difference, but at the same time it's very unrealistic almost because people don't like change. So to try and convince people that even that there is a problem is a challenge in and of itself, especially when since the 1950s we've been made into a consumer society. To say like, oh, all the stuff you have is stuff you don't need, but it's my stuff. So
Mhm.
it's compelling based on the limitations of resources, but aside from that, it's
Change is possible. Change usually requires pain. If you think about how many jobs are tied to an economy that requires us to keep buying. I mean, if you look at what happens to the stock market around December and the holiday buying season, you know, if people don't buy a lot of presents, oh my gosh, it's all these reports that sales were down and stock prices drop, people's retirement portfolios tank, they have less confidence in their financial situation, they buy less, and it's this cycle that then can go on, cause recessions, cause hardship. If you want to change things, you can certainly change things. Anything can be changed. If you look over the couple 100-year history just of our country, a lot has changed. But there's been a lot of pain involved too. So things can change, but it's not going to happen like that. It's not going to happen without sacrifice. And when I say pain, a lot of times that pain is not distributed equally. You know, we talked about the idea the other day of carrying capacity, where there's always the few deer that do really well despite whatever consequences and situations abound, and others always seem to take the short end of the stick. So, yeah, is it realistic or not? Change is real, but change requires pain. What else did you think of this? You had a comment.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I don't know who made the video, but it seemed like a lot of the statistics were dramatic or exaggerated a little bit.
Yeah, every time I show this, everybody asks me, are those facts? Actually facts? And I've tried to verify some of them, and some I can't. One fact I can verify is that, yes, it is true that we do throw away 99% of everything we buy today within 6 months. That's true. She also showed that at the beginning of the process, that for every barrel of trash we throw out, there's actually 7 or 8 or 12 barrels, I don't remember the number. That's actually true too. And I'll just give you a good example. Take mining. If you want gold, okay, you want to get gold out of the ground. Gold usually just doesn't sit there in a big old brick for you to go pick up. In fact, most gold ore, and we'll talk about what ore means in another class or two, you can't even see the gold in it. If you go up to South Dakota to one of the most profitable mines in the country, the Homestake Gold Mine, and you pick up a piece of their ore, and even look at it with a little lens, you can't see the gold. It's in there microscopically. They have to mine a ton of rock. Okay, a ton of rock is about a square meter to get out 0.02 ounces of gold. 2/100ths of an ounce of gold per 2,000 pounds of rock. That 2,000 pounds of rock is waste. Where does it go? What they do, it's really interesting. Gold mining's been around a couple hundred years, so they developed all of these technologies for extracting gold cheap. Can you believe that's profitable? To dynamite out, move in trucks, this much rock to get 0.02 ounces of gold? It is. So they take this rock, they blow it up with dynamite, they truck it into these mills where they crush it into little pieces, then they squirt cyanide all over it. And cyanide latches onto the gold and pulls it out of the rock, Then they send it through a graphite furnace, and the cyanide releases the gold, and they get this cool gold. And it's really well set up and automated, and they can make profit. But they have all this extra crushed up rock, and they basically put it back in the hole that they took it out of. But when you crush rock, it takes up about 30% extra space. So they got more rock than will fit in the hole, so they're making like little mountains and stuff out of it. So it doesn't mean that the waste is toxic or anything. It's just waste rock. You can use it for building materials and things like that, but that's considered waste, and it is. Not all waste is toxic. We're actually going to spend a whole chapter talking about garbage in here. I tell all my students, if you want to make a crap load of money in life, go into the garbage industry. For reasons we'll talk about here, it is one of the most profitable industries in the world. And it's because of precisely what you watch. It's this materials economy and throwing away 99% of everything we buy. All that stuff has to go somewhere, and it needs to go somewhere safely so that it doesn't impact people in a negative way. So if you can figure out ideas on how to dispose of waste, cut down on waste more efficiently, more environmentally friendly, and more health consciously, you can make a crap load of money. So that's what I tell students. If you really want to make a difference at every point along that materials economy where she showed all the problems, there are potential solutions. And all those potential solutions are worth money. That's what scientists do. Try to figure out problems and make a living at the same time. So I can't verify every fact. In fact, some of her facts are wrong. She said you need like 5 planets if we keep using up resources at the same rate we are now. We're going to talk about some terminology coming up, resources and reserves. Resources is everything that's out in nature. Everything. The Earth has an amazing amount of resources. We couldn't burn through the Earth's resources if we wanted to in any appreciable rate of time. We are burning through the resources that are easy to get to and profitable. And that's something different. That's called a reserve. So she was actually talking about reserves, not resources. We're not going to like chew up the planet, but things are going to get more expensive. And we'll talk about that later. So some of her facts were facts. Many of her facts were not. Any other questions, comments? Yeah.
So now I'm curious. So I watch Alaska Gold. So in that show, are they using cyanide and chemicals? Because it looks like they're just spraying it down with water and sifting.
Yeah, that's a different kind of deposit called a placer deposit, where the gold has already been eroded out of the rock.
Oh, okay.
So what they usually do is they basically take up all the sediment, and about 1/1000th of a percent of that sediment holds gold, and they put it through these sluice boxes and things, and then put the sediment back into the streams. And so they don't have to use toxic chemicals in that sense. They do divert waterways,
Right.
so it can impact the health of a stream, and if you have salmon and fish in there, it can bother it. They do disturb the sediment, so if there's anything in there that's toxic that has been buried and out of sight, they sort of remobilize it. A lot of times they go into old mining deposits, and the old miners 100 years ago used to do the same thing. And when you get down to your, your heavy stuff, it's a mixture of gold and magnetite and some other things. And they used to use mercury to separate out the gold from everything. And mercury is extremely toxic. And a lot of that ended up back into the sediment. So now when they disturb it, that mercury gets remobilized again. So they have some mercury problems. So it's not without environmental problems, but the kind of gold I'm talking about is to take rock deposit, big old, dig it out of the ground sorts of things. That's what they'll use to spray cyanide on. So there's different sorts of approaches for different types of deposits. The one you're talking about, they don't need to use cyanide. The one I was talking about, they definitely use cyanide. Other questions? What do you think of the message? What do you think of the messenger? Is she believable to you? Or she annoy you? Say it.
What?
You have a comment, I can tell.
I mean, I don't know. I just had a comment on, like, not really having to do with that, but on, like, how the corporations have grown larger than the government and made it more, the government, like, doing things for corporations, which I know, like, an example that's, like, kind of controversial is, like, the meat and dairy industry, and how since it's grown so large, like, how, I learned that the food pyramid isn't really like what it's supposed to be, and how the portion of like meats that you're supposed to eat aren't true for like good health. But we learn it in like our science textbooks and stuff when it's not really that healthy for you, just because the meat and dairy corporation's so big they want you to keep buying it. Which is just something that I thought was interesting, because the government, like how she was saying, the government's supposed to protect us and like be for us, but I don't know.
Yeah, we certainly have this sort of symbiotic relationship now with governments and corporations because of the money involved. I mean, I don't think anybody from either political side could deny that. So there is always this concern as to whether the government watchdog agencies that are supposed to be into protection are really doing their job, or whether they're influenced by all the money. That's a question that always comes up, and sometimes they do have our best interest, and other times they don't. I don't think that that's overly political. Did you find her message somewhat political?
Yes.
You know, and given our political polarity in this country, when you look, basically half the people lean right, half the people lean left, and media seems to have a financial stake in fanning those flames and making us really hate each other as Americans. Whenever you have a science message and add politics to it, you risk the danger of losing half your audience. I mean, to me, she certainly came across as being more left. And if you lean more right, that sort of message, even though there's some good things in there, may be lost on you because of the messenger. I think back to 10 years ago when Al Gore was pushing the climate change thing. A lot of people just wouldn't listen to him because he was a Democrat. It didn't really have to matter. It didn't really matter what his message was. Because he was a Democratic politician, he immediately lost half of his audience. And a lot of scientists actually said, you know, we agree with you, Al, with global warming, now just shut up, because you're not helping. And others said, you know, no, the opposite. No, you're this high-profile person. You're exactly what we need. We need leaders to talk about this. But I think she could have done this without any sort of political slant at all. What about that? Yeah, go ahead.
What was left-leaning about the video?
What was what?
What was left-leaning about the video?
She took pot shot at George Bush, which he actually said that you should go shopping, but it was part of a bigger message. He said, you need to resume your normal life, you know, go out with friends, go to church, go shopping. You know, and I think that message was not bad, no matter what side you were on. He was saying, don't let the terrorists dissuade you from your normal life. If you do that, that's what they want. You know, do these things, including shopping. And he made it sound like it was
Taken
this.
wildly out of context.
Yeah. So there was that part of it. Things like, anytime you make something, you're trashing the planet. There are consequences to any extraction of resources. You know, so unless you're going to walk around with a fig leaf, you are going to trash the planet, whether you're right-leaning, left-leaning. That was probably a bit over the top and unnecessary. I'm trying to play this down the middle without letting my own personal politics enter this. But I think it probably leaned more left than right. You can disagree, and that's fine. That's just the way it came across to me. You have a comment?
Yeah, I was just thinking some of the ways in which she said things made it seem like it was an obvious solution, and so that was a little obnoxious.
A little
It'd be like,
condescending
well,
to you?
Yeah, a little bit, and some of the things were also things that were like personal opinions, but were like, this is the right way, one example, or the recycling is the only way to go and stuff, and it's like, yes, these are all good things, but they're also opinions and stuff like that, so.
Yeah, even recycling is, if recycling was the best way in all facets of how we think of best, we'd be doing more of it. The problem with recycling is that I don't think anybody argues that it's a good goal to have. The problem today is that it's more expensive than digging crap out of the ground. Why? Why is it more expensive to recycle aluminum can? It is. If you have an aluminum can, it's more expensive to take that aluminum can and make an aluminum can out of it by recycling than it is just to dig the aluminum out of the ground and make a can. It seems weird, right? You have a can, you should be able to make a can out of it cheap. It isn't. You can actually take rock and make a can out of it cheaper. Why?
To clean it and stuff.
It's all because of the energy required for recycling. It's enormously energy inefficient because we don't have good technologies yet. We haven't been doing the recycling thing as long as we've been digging aluminum out of the ground. They have a 100-year head start on being efficient. But it's really expensive. And what do we use for energy? Mostly petroleum products or coal. That's where a lot of our electricity comes from. So if you want to recycle, you're also going to be burning fossil fuels. And if you're an environmentalist, is that the best? It's not such an easy answer then when you consider all that, right? So yeah, I agree with you. She oversimplified some things. And I found her just kind of annoying with that sometimes too. And that's why I gave you this. I intentionally found something that there are some really good messages in here. But it's easy to ignore them because of the messenger. And it's, especially when they sprinkle in extraneous things that can alienate some people because of their political or social or religious beliefs. If she just would have stuck to the facts, the real facts, I think it would have been far more powerful. What did you find really compelling? What was the thing that you found the most interesting that you think you will take with you from that, despite any shortcomings of the delivery?
The statistic about 99% of things being thrown away. That I immediately started thinking about everything in my room, like, what do I throw away every day?
A lot of it has to do with food. I mean, that's lumped into it as well. I mean, obviously we're not going to keep most of our food around more than 6 months. I'm sure some cans and stuff. But so that's kind of skewed just because of consumables, But the fact remains, look at everything with you. Everything that you have today. Are you going to be using this 2 years from now? You going to have that same computer? Maybe, but it's going to be crap, right? What about the clothing? You guys going to be wearing these clothes 2 years from now? Guys do. We have less social pressure. I mean, what she said about, getting on TV and your shoes are going to, you're going to wear those boots 2 years from now.
If they still work, I will.
You might.
Or I'll go to the thrift store.
I know, there is, but you know the idea, right, is that you have all these things that are perfectly perceived obsolescence is a real thing. You throw away stuff that still has some working value. That happens a lot.
One pair of boots from 2009, still wearing them.
No, we're not gonna talk about my wardrobe at all. Yeah, I don't follow some of these rules, but the fact is most people do. And a lot of stuff that you have, you're just not gonna use 2 years from now. It's gonna be in the trash, and it still might have value. And some of it, the one thing I want you to remember from this are the two types of obsolescence, which leads to all the crap being thrown out. Planned obsolescence, which really pisses me off because my washing machine that I bought less than 2 years ago had all these great reviews, died because of like a $9 part that they won't sell, so I have to buy another $600 washing machine. And my wife she has a condo in Steamboat, and it's got a 20-year-old washing machine that still works. And she's like, I'm not getting rid of this. I'm not getting rid of this. It's old, it's clunky, but it works. And yet my brand new fancy one with all the little sensors and stuff, 6 months and it's dead. And that's planned that way. I bought a new diesel pickup, first new car I've had in my whole life. It's been in the shop 4 times because of like $2 sensors. It's all computerized and stuff, which I hate. But that's the same sort of thing. These are planned to fail. And so it's planned obsolescence, designed for the dump, and then perceived obsolescence, where they convince you that your good stuff is no longer fashionable. And that's why we throw away so much material. Yeah.
I think like a similar thing to that, like something that really annoyed me was how they changed the like charging cord for iPhones, and they waited until every single person had an iPhone, and you know, like 2 or 3 chargers, and one for like, this room, and then like they came out with the new one, and now they all have like the different chargers. So they can throw away all
Apple's the
old ones.
worst too. Are
Yeah.
they not? Are they not? And I mean, give me or how many of you have iPhones? Which one do you have?
5.
5.
My dad's
What's
laughing.
wrong with you?
I'm living in the Stone Age.
I know, because dang it, if you're not a 7, what the hell?
And they're even coming out with that new one that won't have a headphone jack, so the fancy
crazy.
Apple
Yeah,
earbuds
horrors
are
of
not-
hell.
But I mean, isn't that exactly what she was talking about? Perceived obsolescence. Your 5 is just crap, and yet that 5 is more powerful than any computer you could put on your desktop 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, an iPhone 5 as a piece of technology is absolutely amazing, but it's not a 7.
Right.
You know?
And on top of it, we've got all these phones that are indestructible or used to be indestructible, and then you've got the iPhones with the glass screens that could easily be switched out for something else. But
Oh, and they could make them waterproof for
Yeah.
about $2.50. Seriously, that's all it would take to make these things water resistant. If you actually wanted waterproof, it may add $10 in parts to it.
Isn't the 7 now gonna be water resistant or something?
Yeah, and Samsung's 7
Yeah,
is
like this
water.
supposedly,
Supposedly,
like, I
but
can
if you
use
put
this
it in
on
water for long enough.
It's water resistant,
Yeah,
not
it's not
waterproof. They could make it waterproof. I have a laptop that I bought when I first came here 8 years ago. It's a Panasonic Toughbook. I still use it. You can drop that thing from 8 feet. You can submerge it in water for half a day and it still runs. It was designed for the military. So they can make stuff that will last. I mean, come on, look at the technology we have. They can certainly make things, but you gotta go through. I mean, I had to buy this through the military. It's awesome. It weighs about 9.5 pounds. It really sort of sucks. But I take that. I bought it so I can work on volcanoes with it. So you can stick them in fumaroles and it rains on it and they get hot and that thing just chugs right along. I've never had a failure. I've never had a problem with it. Things can work. You used to have to go to the military to get it because they're able to make special contracts. But yeah, the companies really don't want to sell those because you'll buy one and you'll be using it 5 years from now. So this planned and perceived obsolescence is a huge part of our economy.
I think about the computers being meant too, how one piece changes every time.
Yeah.
And they just make sure that you can't replace only that piece.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously an oversimplification because with a more powerful computer chip, you have to have more powerful componentry to go with it. But, I mean, even the chips from 4 or 5 years ago could basically run all the programs that we have today. You know, if you're into some really specialized gamer stuff today, you need the latest and greatest. But seriously, 90% of us are doing Word, browsing the internet. You can use computers from 8 years ago to do that just fine. But no, they're going to convince you that you need this, that, and the other thing. And you're going to buy it. You want that 7. You want it. You know you want it. We're all victim to it. And the thing that I really liked about it, even though, like I said, the delivery just sort of drives me crazy, but really and I see this when I travel too, is that, so I did this semester at sea thing a year ago where I floated around the world with 600 college students and we visited 15 different countries. The happiest people that I saw anywhere on earth We're in Myanmar. Myanmar has been shut off from the Western world by a military government until 3 years ago. They don't have iPhones. They don't have internet. They don't have all this crap that we have. Happiest people I've ever seen in my life. Smiling, they hang out with their families. They have enough food. They have shelter. I mean, if you looked at their shelters, you'd go, I don't want to live there. But that's what they're used to. You know, keeps the rain off, keeps them. They were the happiest people I've ever seen in my life. The country with the lowest happiness quotient in the world, the two, Hong Kong and China, or Hong Kong and Singapore. They also have the highest percentage of millionaires of any countries on the planet. There is no correlation between happiness and money once your basic needs are met. And I talked about what happened to our happiness quotient since the 1950s. And I believe that's true. We have more and more stuff and we're less happy. I mean, do you really need all this stuff? I mean, I have a house that's way bigger than I need. I don't need the new truck I just bought. And because of that, I gotta work extra hard. You know, I wouldn't have to have, I could do other, I love this job. So it's okay, but if a lot of people are working in jobs they don't like for those sorts of things that they really don't need. And yet, what do? You watch TV, and basically, I think what she had on there was correct. You watch TV, and all ads are designed to do is tell you your life sucks. That you should buy this, and your life is going to be better. That's how they sell stuff. So you're bombarded with that. And it must have an effect, because we're always, you want the 7, you want it. You want it. What other messages did you find in there? Anything else? I asked you what the most interesting thing you learned was. What else?
I was completely unaware that they purposefully made us into a consumer society. And that was very interesting to me because it has so many effects on how we live in our life because we run to the mall to get something new, to get new shoes, to...
And think about what's happened. Okay, so back in the 50s, we did suddenly, I mean, we've always been somewhat of a consumer economy, but it was, the corporation was a concept developed in the early part of the 1900s. And if you look at what the definition of corporation, its only goal is to make a profit. It's not to do something good for society, it's to make a profit. That's what they are designed to do. And anything else is not part of their mission. That's what corporations are designed to make profit. But here in the US, what do you think about the externalized costs? That makes sense to you? When you buy things, yeah, you don't see a lot of the costs that are not monetary, right? But what we're trying to do in the United States is not externalize so many of those costs to us as workers. So we have Obamacare. That's one of the ways that we're trying to get rid of externalizing the cost. Because prior to that, maybe your employer gave you health care, but a lot of them didn't. So who had to provide health care? You did, right? So that's an externalized cost. Having good water, clean air, making corporations not pollute. That they are trying to minimize externalizing cost. So that makes it more expensive for these corporations to do business, right? They have to provide health care. That's a cost. They have to clean up their waste emissions. That's a cost, right? What do a lot of corporations do? Their mission is to make money. And here in the US, we're forcing them to spend more on costs. So what do? They go somewhere else so that they can externalize the costs there, so that they can make more money, which is what we want them to do. And then we hack on them for saying, oh, you're unpatriotic or un-American or whatever by going to these other countries and setting up shop there, when it's actually kind of what we're forcing them to do. So it's a difficult thing. We could bring them back, but it's going to make them less profitable. And if it's less profitable, who's going to pay for it? If Apple, okay, Apple just got fined, what, a ridiculous amount of money because they weren't paying taxes in Ireland. They had actually moved a lot of their stuff overseas to avoid paying taxes here. So if we make them come back and pay taxes here, it's going to cost them more, right? They're not going to be as profitable. Who's going to pay for that? You guys are, right? Because that iPhone 7 is going to be another $30 more, because they now have to pay for the costs they were externalizing somewhere else. Are you guys going to be willing to do it? A lot of these, and a lot of this, you know, with our elections coming up, these are the questions nobody really asks our candidates. You know, how do you, oh, bring them back, you know, but what about the increased cost to consumers here? What are you going to do about that? No one ever asks sort of these second order questions. Oh, it sounds great. Yeah, we should make these corporations come back here. Sure, that sounds great. What are the consequences for doing that? How are you going to handle those? Those are questions we don't ask any of our candidates. But I hope you guys will be a little smarter. So, any other questions or comments on this? What I'm going to do with the next couple of classes is actually go through the science behind a lot of those different steps that she showed in that sort of materials economy. We're going to start with extraction, mining. We're going to talk about mining. The good, the bad, why it's necessary, some of the consequences of it, ways things that could be done better. We'll talk about garbage, and kind of in the middle there'll be a little bit of economics. Any other questions or comments you have on this? Okay, so this is just kind of my takeaway. Is that even though the delivery kind of annoyed me, and I've actually had students really, really irritated after watching this, just to the point of wanting to throw stuff at the screen and at me for even showing it, because it offended their political sensibilities so much. You guys didn't seem to take quite as much exception. But I think there's some good underlying points in there, and hopefully some things that you'll think about. I think the idea of perceived and planned obsolescence really puts a huge demand on resources, energy, your happiness. You guys are throwing out perfectly good things just to buy new things, and in order to buy it, you're going to have a job that pays you a certain amount. And if you don't have a job that pays that much, you're going to have a huge amount of economic stress in your life. So it comes at a cost. Those are costs that are externalized. And some of you have learned to live with 5-year-old boots, 6-year-old shirts, 8-year-old jackets. Others have to have the latest and greatest, and that's fine. It's just that, again, it comes at an externalized cost. You have to have the money to do this. Okay. Where does our stuff come from? We're just going to get started on this today, and I do not like the lights in these. Is that too dark? Okay, all right. So I'm going to take you back to sort of the very beginning so that we all have a working vocabulary to sort of understand mining. Mining and mineral have the same root. So let's talk about what a mineral is. I know you've all heard this term, but you might not really know what it is. But geologists have a 5-part definition for what a mineral is. A mineral is something that's naturally occurring. You can make what they call minerals in the lab, but to a geologist, if it's made in the lab, it's not really a mineral. So it's a naturally occurring inorganic substance, meaning not living. And I have here, well, sort of, because there are some gray areas. You've seen snails and shells, mussel shells. Snails and mussels are living organisms. The shells are actually inorganic secretions. that shell material is considered to be a mineral, even though the gooey living part would not be. But for the most part, minerals are inorganic, chemically homogeneous. Just a fancy term for saying it has the same chemical formula. What about table salt? Is it naturally occurring?
Sometimes.
Yeah, they mine this stuff out of the ground. Salt flats. Yeah, table salt's naturally occurring. Is it inorganic? Yep. What's its chemical formula? NaCl, sodium chloride. It's always sodium chloride. It's not anything else. So it's chemically homogeneous. It's a definition that sometimes is somewhat surprising to people. Here's just some examples of chemically homogeneous. Quartz is always SiO2. Calcite, CaCO3. Salt, the mineral name is called halite. It's always NaCl. What about ice? So far, does ice meet the definition of a mineral?
Yes, only if it's naturally occurring.
Yep. If you went out and found ice on a lake, is that a mineral? Well, it is naturally occurring. It's inorganic. Doesn't have carbon in it. It's H2O. Chemically homogeneous. It's H2O. All right, let's look at the rest of the definition and see if ice still continues to meet the definition. It's a crystalline solid. What's a solid? Atomically, what's a solid?
The atoms are not moving relative to one another.
Good. They're in fixed position. Okay? In ice, the atoms are in fixed positions. What makes it a crystal is if the atoms in fixed position and arrangement, if that arrangement is repeated millions and billions of times, or it's said to have long range order. So if you have an Na, a sodium atom, next to a chlorine, next to a sodium, next to a chlorine, next to a sodium, if that extends on for millions and billions of atoms, that's said to be a crystal. And if you do that, it might be still really tiny. Might be microscopic, but there still might be millions and billions of atoms in a fixed position order. Ice actually meets this definition still. And the real important thing from a practical standpoint, and for a human being standpoint, is we love minerals because they have characteristic physical properties. It's these properties that we desire for our stuff. Why do we desire copper? Why would we pay somebody to take copper out of the ground? Does copper do something that we want it to do?
Just because of its conductivity.
Conductivity. Yeah, it's a great conductor of electricity. That's the main reason we dig it out of the ground. I'll give you some examples. Halite. Talked about it. We dig it out of the ground because we like the way it tastes. It's a flavor enhancer. Do we desire diamonds? We desire diamonds for two reasons. One, gemstones. Why are diamonds kind of a prized gemstone? Why do you put diamond in a ring and not quartz? Quartz can kind of look like diamond, right? A clear, nice clear stone. Why diamond?
Quartz is in everything, and diamonds are hard to come by.
Diamonds are a little rare, and the reason a lot of people like diamonds is that they give off light in a certain way. They're very sparkly. They actually re-reflect and refract light in a really special way. Gives them their radiance. If you really look closely at a good diamond, you'll see all different colors coming off of it. It's brilliant. And it's also the hardest natural substance that we know, so we use it to cut other substances. How many of you have seen the micas? Everybody know what a mica is? What's a mica? How would you describe a mica?
You can break it easily.
You can break it. And how does it break?
In sheets.
It breaks in nice sheets, right? And it's like, oh, that's a nice curiosity. We actually use that industrially. We add it to paint. Why would we put mica flakes in paint? Not for the color. It's actually an anti-blistering agent in paint. Paints used to always bubble up and blister. We started adding micas to it, really fine ground up micas, and all those little sheets will lie flat on top of one another and give it some strength. So it's kind of a strength enhancer in paint. And it's because it has that basal cleavage. It breaks into those sheets. Now you've heard of rocks and you've heard of minerals. Well, the terms are related. A rock is simply one or more minerals in a sample. So it's an aggregate of one or more minerals. So actually ice is a mineral. Ice is a rock. What's lava? Liquid rock. So is water lava? If ice is a rock, water is a liquid rock, right? Is water lava?
No.
Maybe.
No, because it didn't come from the mantle. Like lava.
A lot of geologists consider water to be lava.
That is so weird.
And there are volcanoes on satellites in the far outer reaches of our solar system that only erupt water. And they form ice volcanoes.
That's awesome.
So it's kind of cool.
That is cool.
Here, because it's everywhere, we like to give lava sort of a special meaning. But water is technically lava. It's melted rock.
Huh, that's really cool.
Cool and completely useless at the same time, right? All right. You know what?